It is deadline day. It's here. So much has happened already. Jimmy Butler got traded. Chris Middleton got traded. What are the Pacers going to do, if anything? What does the latest reporting say? What did Rick Carlisle say? And what two trades made me really think about the Pacers on Wednesday? Rhett Bauer is going to join us to talk about it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, y'all, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, it's trade deadline day. It's here, a lot of fans' favorite day of the year. Pacers play tonight. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Today, we're talking about trades, the outlook for the Pacers, more reporting, what Rick Carlisle said. So much has happened in the league the last couple of days. Jimmy Butler got traded about 5 seconds before this podcast was recorded, so Rhett and I were very much bouncing our minds around. But lots of good stuff today. We talk about two trades that have already happened that I think the Pacers certainly kept an eye on. What Rick Carlisle said about the trade deadline, the latest credible reports, and then we both name our most likely Pacer. And I really get into the weeds on my answer. You'll want to stick around for that. Hope you guys enjoy this one. We'll be talking with Derek Kramer right after the trade deadline on anything the Pacers do or don't do. Let's just get right to it. It's deadline day, except Wednesday became deadline day. The moves were crazy. Chris Middleton, a multi-time All-Star, on the move. Kyle Kuzma got traded. Ex-Pacer Daniel Tice got traded. And about 3 seconds before we're about to record, Jimmy Butler to the Warriors. By the time this is out, Kevin Durant could be on who knows what team. It's all been crazy. And the Pacers, what are they going to do today? Well, we're going to try to dive into that with the newest information available, what the market has already revealed about something the Pacers could do, what Rick Carlisle said about the trade market. That is my very hyperactive intro, as I just spent 10 minutes, probably more than that, but time flies, trying to figure out who makes sense to get who in this crazy 5-team Jimmy Butler trade, and who the person who had to deal with me listening to all that, someone who does not have a no-trade clause. It's Rhett Bauer. Rhett, welcome back. How are you?
Oh man, I'm fantastic. I got to watch in real time us guessing which minimum players, which piecing together deals that aren't official yet to figure out how many moving pieces there are. We watched like 3 teams get out of the tax in the matter of seconds. And so it's a great time. It's a great time.
It was something, certainly, yes. Yeah, Jimmy Butler's out of the Eastern Conference, but the Miami Heat might be better now. We'll talk about the ramifications of the trade deadline on the Pacers once it's over, probably after the Clippers game tomorrow night. But today, we're actually going to look at the Pacers, and specifically two trades that I think they probably looked at and went, okay, interesting, noted. 2, what Rick Carlisle said about their deadline, which is hilarious because it's very similar to what Steve Kerr said before his team traded for Jimmy Butler. And 3, more of the recent reporting surrounding the Indiana Pacers and what they could be doing with the deadline here. We will start, Rhett, with 2 trades that piqued my interest in the NBA on Wednesday. Number 1, I already mentioned, ex-Pacer Daniel Tice on the move from Oklahoma City to New Orleans. And it cost the Pelicans a 2nd-round pick. Now, they got a bunch of cash back. It is totally possible that they got so much cash back that the Pelicans view this as just selling their pick. They got out of the tax. They had lots of motivation to do it. But the Pacers, who I thought their most likely trade candidate's been James Wiseman, if it costs them a second to do it and they're not actually over the tax, I'm not sure I would do that. I need to know how much cash is in that trade. That is very interesting to me. Did that even hit your radar? Do you even care about the price of shedding salary? Am I overthinking this?
No, you're not overthinking it. 'Tis the season. But I was thinking about it as like, hey, this is a viable backup center option that makes a very low amount of money that like Wiseman for Tice could have actually maybe worked, except the Pelicans obviously wanted to deduct the tax. So no, it's definitely relevant for where the Pacers are because, it's a 2031 second. Like that's a long ways away. And I don't know how much cash it was, but I'm sure by the time people are hearing this, we'll probably know, but it's definitely relevant because the Pacers don't have to deduct the tax right now. They can get further away from it, but in the absence of another move, I probably wouldn't add a second unless the cash is just significant. Even with a couple extras, I don't think that's really worth it. And we saw the same thing with the Celtics dumping Springer, which is another contract for another 2nd-round pick. And so that that definitely changes the market a little bit on what options might be out there for the prices that it seems like teams are already paying.
Yes, I totally agree. And I asked Nate Duncan that because I wondered that, like, if there's, so we've seen 6 teams already this week duck the tax, right? And I wondered if all these cost cutting moves meant that doing the smallest salary dumps would actually end up being maybe more expensive than a typical year. And so if it actually takes a second to get off of Tice, the Pelicans had to. They were so close to the tax and they stink. They have to get under. The Pacers don't have to get under. They're already under the tax. Now, it would be very hard for them to go into the playoffs with 3 completely dead roster spots, and maybe they could sign a converted two-way later this season if they don't, but that's all they could do, right? It'd be a lot harder for them to actually add a real player for depth purposes if they don't get off of money. So if it actually costs a second, I don't think I would do it as the Pacers. I would just stay under and maybe deal with things later in terms of figuring out how to get a 13th actual body on the floor. Yes, the Springer trade is the other one that is very similar to this that you mentioned. The difference there is Tice makes the minimum. He could be traded to any team in the league. Jaden Springer, I believe, is at like $4 million on the 4th year of his rookie scale deal. So he had to go to a team that either had an exception or would equal salary. The Rockets had an exception, and that cost the Celtics their 20-30 right? A full second. But that is, again, twice as much as what Wiseman makes. That's about what Isaiah Jackson makes. And I definitely wouldn't trade a second to get off of Isaiah Jackson's dead money. I think his bird rights could actually matter quite a bit for the Pacers this summer. So all that said, of the moves made so far, obviously some Titanic seismic craziness as we just went through with Jimmy just now, you and I did. But those two were the two that for the Pacers specifically made me go, ooh, interesting. I would like to register that those were things that were said.
Well, and the especially funny thing is while we're talking about center options is that the Kings gave up 2 seconds and City Sissoko to get Jonas Valanciunas.
Yeah.
So it's like you add another second and you get a rotation player, or you for the cost of 1 second you can dump 4 to or 2 to 4 million. So obviously that's a false equivalence, but still, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind with this is that the most likely move was Wiseman, but I think that you and I both, when we talked about it, was like the rationale there might be in conjunction with another move.
Yeah.
And so if there is another move, then, there's always the idea that that cost might be worth it to enable something else into the bigger picture. But as it stands by itself, I don't think it would be a dump, but it might be, again, add another second and get a rotation player of some caliber for another instance, wherever that might be.
A very funny thing I've never seen before is Shams just tweeted that Miami is now working through a resolution with Kyle Anderson because the Toronto portion fell through. I love the new CBA when all these millions of teams have to be
or be
involved.
moved.
Just,
you don't say.
Yes. Well, wow, that's shocking information. Thank you. I'm glad this player could be traded or could not be traded. Huh? Yeah, it's insane. And that's what this trade deadline has led to is that the cap barely went up. There's new aprons and it's tight spending for everybody, including the Pacers, who are dealing with the tax. And so that is why those two trades were the two on the day that made me go, oh boy, interesting notes for them. And if it takes a second for them to shed any money, I would not do it. I would rather hold the seconds for any other flexibility add next year, any upgrade to make in future seasons. But it would make them their only option to have a real body that could play in the playoffs would be converting it to a contract, which is not the greatest, but that is I guess very late in the season, maybe they could add a prorated minimum. I'd have to actually do the math. But regardless, it would be a tight squeeze, and they couldn't do it till, late March, early time. Okay, Rhett. The other thing Pacers related that happened is actual directly Pacers, and that is Rick Carlisle talked about the trade deadline. Shout out to Kevin Bowen of 107.5. The Fan, they do their weekly interview on the morning show with Rick, and I can't imagine Rick wanted to wake up early in Portland on Tuesday to do it after they played in Utah Monday night. So it sounds like they tape recorded this, and Kevin tweeted that it was a call. He said, just recorded with Rick Carlisle for tomorrow's morning show. So this will come out on Thursday. And he asked Rick, does he expect any Pacers trade line activity? Rick, 3 words, very succinct, to the point. Quote, no, I don't. Okay, that is I think the most likely thing that happens to the Pacers is a stand pat deadline or something small like I've mentioned, even though there are lots of stuff that they could do or could make sense now. It just isn't really the perfect time for it. Does that surprise you at all? Do you expect anything between when this episode actually does come out and the deadline?
No, I don't expect anything. But we just saw Steve Kerr say something about not wanting to give up the farm, and then they traded for Jimmy Butler, and we saw Jimmy Butler say
Traded
he
for
didn't
Jimmy.
want to play for the Warriors, and then he got traded to the Warriors and got $60 million more than what he was expecting to do. While I think I agree with Rick, and I believe him when he says that, I don't know that you know it is the season to say that. But I think that the team chemistry is such that, and the options are out there for what they are. It's so limited, and the team is in such a good place with the return of Nimhard and Neesmith and the best record in January that it wouldn't surprise me if they did nothing now that they are, you know, on the way up and not sliding as much as they were when we talked, I think, last time.
Yeah.
And so I believe Rick, but it's just there's two very prominent examples that happen within the same organization between the Warriors that what is said right now is not always what ends up happening.
It's also just pretty unusual. Like, I haven't ever really made this point for their trade deadline. It's pretty unusual for a team that makes a ton of moves in the offseason, Siakam, Toppin, Nemhard, McConnell, to then make trades. Like, you just did a lot of stuff. You usually see teams take a year to do stuff. Not always. That's not a hard and fast thing, but especially when they're playing well and the team immediately behind them in the standings, in my opinion, got worse today. The Heat might have gotten better, in my opinion. We'll see. They don't have Jimmy Butler anymore. But the East standings will be fascinating to see where this shakes out. But the Pacers are fourth for a reason. They've been playing way better since their low point. I mean, they're going to have the second 25 games of the season for every team, probably the third or fourth best record in the NBA. Like, that is the profile of a team that at worst should be buyers and most likely will, do something small or nothing at all. So I wanted to relay what Rick Carlisle said because I think he's right given their team dynamics. But also, I'm glad you pointed out that Steve Kerr at 7:42 p.m. said, yeah, I don't think we're going to do anything with the farm. And then less than an hour later, they had to get media members out of their locker room to tell everybody they traded for Jimmy Butler. It's not just the NBA.
Yeah. Well, and two, I think your point about teams doing a bunch of stuff in the offseason, then being active at the trade deadline, I imagine that's probably not true outside of like the LeBron Cleveland years where it was just a absolute rotating door of back end cast members of all stars from a decade prior that were absolutely washed. But I think in this Pacers case, a lot of it was maintaining what was rather than making changes to the team. And so it's more like locking up Nemhard for a deal that makes sense and locking up McConnell for a deal that makes sense and Toppin and Siakam and all that stuff. So I don't know if those amount of moves should have any bearing on whether the team makes any moves at the deadline because the team's flaws that we knew about last year are still there from this summer and they're still there now kind of, and the looming issue of the tax and the salary sheet as it is still there too. So like all of the things are the same, which includes the roster and the issues with the roster on the cap sheet. So I don't think that the amount of transactions that happened this summer really has any bearing on it, but I completely understand what you're saying about like that's a lot of turnover in a short amount of time.
Exactly, especially for a team that made the conference finals last year, very recently was at that level. The only thing is, like Nate Duncan said it perfectly, that if you count James Johnson as a dead roster spot for the playoffs, which is a little unfair, but still, that 3 is unusually high, alas. Everybody, short little break here to talk about PrizePicks. Basketball season's heating up. There's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports with over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings. PrizePicks makes it easy and fun to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Here's how it works. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one or more correct pick, you're cashing out. So many more things you could do, like more Luka Doncic assists whenever he debuts for the Lakers, or more or less on Jason Tatum points, and so many promos in their promo app, including their super sweet Millie winnings, big game lineups, and so much more fun on PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly if you play your first $5 lineup on PrizePicks. Run your game. Rhett, let's turn to Credible. I'm going to say this again because this is my least favorite response from people. Credible reports we've gotten about the Pacers since the last time I ran through them, which was when they were in Paris. And I read them because that is the best way to do this and make sure that people who are doing a great job reporting things say stuff that makes sense. Here's what's interesting, though. Now that I've talked about the trade deadline a lot here, as I go through these, I've already covered a lot of these scenarios, which actually makes me feel good about what's out there and what makes it make sense. For example, number one is from Dan Woik of the LA Times. Dan Woike, I might have just said that wrong, who said, quote, Indiana guard Bennedict Mathurin is being monitored by nearly every team seen as a buyer at the deadline, according to one scouting executive. Because the Pacers are playing such good basketball, the team is expected to seek a player it values while trying to recoup the value of the first-round pick it spent on Mathurin in a deal. Well, by God, that's exactly what they should want for Ben Mathurin, and they shouldn't shop him, but if someone's going to offer them that, and he's got this extension coming up in the summer, if not, he has to be paid the following year, yeah, they should think about it. I don't think they should do it unless the offer is awesome, but that makes a lot of sense to me, and in the same report, he said they are receiving offers for Turner. That's great. They can receive offers for anybody, as the Luka trade taught us. Maybe those offers are hilarious, but those two things make sense to me, even though they do not indicate to me that there is a potential deal coming that I don't expect.
I also would like to get a player that they value and recoup first-round pick that they spent on a player a couple of years ago. That,
Yes.
It
does seem like a very rosy interpretation of a good return.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like he might be traded or he might not. Like this is the outcomes. But yeah, that's interesting. I think we've talked about it multiple times, so I'm not going to reiterate it. But of all the players that kind of make sense to move, I think Mathurin is up there just because of the looming payday and the amount of options they have on the wing. And while he offers something that no one else on the roster can, he also that makes him stand out as much as it makes him valuable to the team. So
I agree. I don't think they should trade Mathurin right now unless they get like an absurd pick package of some kind. I get that their financial stuff is coming and they might have to think about the salary matching and how it's all going to work. But yeah, I don't see that being a reality. Number two, from the rising goat of reporting. Very good and is now crushing the transaction game too. Fred Katz. Man, is he good. He and Michael Scotto among my faves in terms of good personality, good reporting, good transactional detailing, all that. Fred Katz of The Athletic says, quote, this is from very late in January, all signs point toward the Pacers not trading Myles Turner, and talks involving Andrew Nembhard have not gone anywhere. That is smart by the Pacers. That makes a lot of sense to me. The Nembhard part, especially because the salary match they could take back is only the minimum this year. Obviously, that's part of the appeal to other teams, but that makes it hard for the Pacers to actually want to do that. And I think unless they get an awesome center and great assets in return, they shouldn't trade Myles Turner. Do you agree with both of those things? Is that reporting that makes sense to you?
Absolutely. We've said it for a very long time. Don't need to say it again.
He had a third thing in there, but the first two were about not trading somebody. The third one is about someone they've had discussions on. And this to me has been a player that seems like the most likely salary shed to make everything work in the near term. They have, according to Fred Katz, just Obi Toppin. Would that surprise you? It'd be the thing that makes it interesting to me. I'll go first here. So, if you just lined up everybody's salaries and their value to the Pacers and their role compared to their salary, Toppin does seem like the most likely financial casualty if they are going to keep Turner and stay under the tax next year. Next year, he fits into the non-tax pyramid level exception in a trade without the Pacers having to take anything back in return. That's not the case right now. Next year, the cap grows 10%, which makes trades easier. And the offseason trades are easier when teams can roster 21 players instead of the number they can during the season. And next year, the Pacers will know exactly how good they are with this core and what they need as they head into their spending summer with Myles Turner. Toppin is good and fits the Pacers. And I get why, if they got a great offer for him right now, they would trade him. I imagine if they are going to trade Obi Toppin in the year 2025 specifically, it will be after the finals are over. But that one to me is, again, a very believable thing that they would have discussed him because of all those realities about their spending and when it might make sense for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, of all of the options that the Pacers could acquire to get better, like if you're going to move Obi Toppin right now, you're going to get better. Like and that's the thing with the Myles rumors too. And we've talked about it. It's like, what option is out there that is under contract for more years to where it makes sense consider that a hedge against Myles walking in unrestricted free agency that is also comparable to Myles, that also doesn't have flaws or a significant amount of money. Like, there's just, the options are not really there. And the same for Obi Toppin, because he only makes that 12.9. Like, the options of potential, like, small ball closing option that has the flexibility that Obi brings to the team, and quite honestly, like, the attitude, I don't know, attitude, like vibes. I hate the vibes, but like, it's very real, and I just don't see that as an option. So it would have to be an asset
Yes.
play, and that just doesn't seem likely either, because midseason trades are hard. And so we've seen some guys move around that might make some sense, and it just doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to find the perfect combination of outcomes, and that just means it's not likely to happen, in my opinion.
Totally agree. And I've talked to people in the league about this, and they all say, like, oh, if they could get, they phrase like this. They say, oh, it'd be good if the Pacers could get off of Toppin's contract. And I'm like, they wouldn't trade him at negative value. Like, if that's the perception that this would take, they wouldn't do it, right? That doesn't make any sense for them. So that's what I wonder with discussions. Is it a team that wants Toppin, or is it the Pacers having to include him as salary and he's viewed as negative? Great culture fit with the Pacers, and two, in terms of actual basketball, they play the right way for him in a way that not every team does, right? Like, I was talking to somebody about teams I think he'd fit the best on, and we got to like 8 or 9, so the Pacers are among the best for him there, which is another reason that they should keep him. His salary makes more sense for them than any other team. And speaking of Toppin, next up, the second coat, Michael Scotto, in his post-Luka trade report for Hoops Hype, all over this part, says the Mavericks of Dallas, who used to have Maxi Kleber, discussed a Kleber for Toppin package, which would have helped the Pacers financially this year a little bit, but not very much in the long term. It would have made them a worse team. So I thought that was interesting. It would have made sense for Dallas. No longer would make sense for Dallas. It does not make much sense for the Lakers at all to do that, unless they think Obi Toppin's a 5. But I thought that was noteworthy as a, hey, look, that's what we're talking about, right? That's Obi Toppin for someone making less than Obi Toppin. That does have some tangible benefits for the Pacers, even though that specific trade, because I believe Kleber has money next year, is not something they should do.
Yeah, and I looked at Maxi Kleber and was like, hey, Maxi plus Grimes for Obi plus James Wiseman works out financially, doesn't hurt any team's tax, and then adds another potential flex option on the wing to look at some stuff, gets you a rotation big. I don't know how good Maxi would be, but he's on the Lakers now. So that is, I think Time Lord is another one that is seemingly on everybody's radar for backup big. So like, it's situations like that where it's a distressed asset that may or may not have money moving forward. But, I don't see how the Lakers would be interested in Obi at this point. But Maxi would be interesting, but seems like that's about over.
I agree. And we'll continue, Rhett, with this theme of Obi Toppin, because he's been in lots of reports, which says a lot about the Pacers and what they're thinking about. Chris Fedor in Cleveland.com says the Cleveland Cavaliers, you'll never guess, Rhett, who they checked in on. Obi Toppin of the Indiana Pacers. That one is a very hard salary match with the Cavs so close to the tax. They have some interesting stuff like Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade and Karis LeVert and all that, but I don't know what the Pacers would truly want of that group, given their salary structure. So these all stack up to me as like things that make sense, and a lot of Toppin in the last couple rounds of reporting, which to me has always, even dating back to the second they signed it, felt like the most natural deal for them to make if they're ever going to get off the right money. That one's very hard. Don't know what just happened with Lonzo Ball. That extension makes zero sense to me. Regardless, that is the end of the reporting that is credible that has been out there. Unless you feel like I missed something.
No, I don't think so. Lonzo 2-year, $20 million extension. Why?
That's good for Lonzo after being hurt for so many years. But
that's great. I don't understand. But no, looking at the options for the Cavs, like, what did the Cavs have that the Pacers would want that would either make them better this year or help them out in the long term? But I don't see how that happens. Like, that's unlikely.
I agree. And I would like to conclude our credible reporting segment with big thank yous to all these people who had all these things, because they gave me stuff to think about. But alas, I think I'm going to close this discussion with this. Dunked On plays this game, and I think it's a great game. When they go through their trade deadline previews for every team, they conclude with a segment where they say most likely to get traded. What do you think it is, Rhett? One more break here, guys, so we can talk about FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make even more exciting play than with FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59.
James Wiseman still.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to just sit here and bore everybody with the numbers, but he has a team option next year, and so he probably could have been a free agent anyway. What value does he provide the Pacers the rest of the year if they could just waive him and sign someone else? Now, the reason I keep talking about this, so I'll get a little nerdy. The reason they would want to do it now is, one, if they trade his salary away instead of waiving him, it's completely off the book. So they would get much farther from the tax, which could even give them enough room to do like some 10 days this season. If they deal with other injuries, they could convert a contract from a two-way like now and sign someone else to a two-way. I believe the earliest they could convert a two-way if they don't waive anybody is March 20th, which is after the date that you can sign players to two-ways. So they'd be stuck with two-ways, and they're not using their roster spots as effectively as possible. So that is just like the smallest scale version of what to do with it. But 10 days are obviously important. And the other thing is, if you're going to sign, I keep mentioning the playoffs. You don't have 3 dead roster spots for the postseason, right? Well, if somebody is cut by another team on March 1st or earlier, and then they sign with a different team, they are playoff eligible, right? That's how buyouts are usually. That's why that's usually like the last date for buyouts, right? The Pacers had Wes Matthews for the playoffs because he was bought out right around then by the Mavs. So if the Pacers can't afford somebody under the tax by just waiving Wiseman without being able to sign them until March, it does them no good. It doesn't help them in the playoffs. Sure, that player maybe will help them in the regular season, but that's only a temporary patch to the problem. So to me, that is the most likely one. Even if they're just going to convert Freeman, that still makes a lot of sense to me because of the 10-day bonuses, because of being able to add another two-way player on another deal, right? It just adds a lot of extra value. Now they have to decide, what is all that worth? Is that worth a second rounder? To me, probably not, but you're making a very big health risk. Is that worth a bunch of cash, like Wiseman's salary plus more cash? Absolutely, that's worth some cash. Is it worth a crappy second? Maybe. So I don't know what they would do, but there are lots of flexibility and actual tangible playoff depth reasons to do it now instead of just waiving him and getting those benefits anyway, but way later and way less. So that is my extremely long rant about why I think he is the most likely player to be traded. You could say, Tony, Isaiah Jackson fits all those things. And I would say, yes, he does. He also could be a restricted free agent next year, and you might be able to get him for really cheap as he recovers from this Achilles thing. And cheap backup centers would be really nice for the Pacers, who are about to be expensive. Maybe he knows that, but that's fine to me. If I'm the Pacers, they know him better than any team. So that is why Wiseman is by far the most clear answer to me. And there's lots of smaller reasons for Turner, Toppin, Mathurin that I've gone through over and over again. But I think by a significant margin, the answer is James Wiseman.
Yes. And then the next significant margin, I would say after that, is probably, would you say Mathurin or Toppin?
Toppin. Definitely Toppin.
Yeah, I think so
too.
Just, looking at some of the teams out there that, some of the Mathurin stuff is like, okay, there are some logical conclusions you can get to from that, just because he has the value of that extension coming up to where you can have him cost controlled and you can put him in a position where he could, be a significant asset for expensive teams. But the thing with expensive teams is they often don't have the asset to send back that is still valuable for the Pacers. So I don't think that it makes sense to do that. And I would be curious what that like what that threshold would be, because like what you said about it being worth it to trade Wiseman is exactly right. Like where's that line? And the same could be said for Mathurin and for Obi, but I just don't see them stirring the pot and really messing with things right now. Even though those dead roster spots are gonna matter. Like they just will, because that the depth part of the playoffs is uh, you know, sometimes it's overvalued where it's like, oh, your playoffs, you trust 5 guys, you play 6, you have, or like, it's like you want 5 guys out there, you trust 6, you have to play 7 or something like that. And so that suggests that depth isn't that important. But when the Pacers don't have another backup 5 option other than Freeman, you're kind of in a position where you might have to do something you otherwise wouldn't want to do. So, I hope they do something just because it's fun to talk about it, but ultimately, I don't think it's very likely.
You know who the perfect person to ask about dead roster spots and postseason health would be? The team the Pacers beat in the second round last year that ran out of healthy people to trot out on the floor for a 7-game series in Madison Square Garden. That is why you want as many healthy, good players as you can, just in case you're like, oh, crap. We got to play Jericho Sims. Okay, Alec Brooks, you haven't played in months. Get out there, bud. Like, no offense to those guys, they're fine players. It's just, it's scary when you get really hurt. You have dead spots going to the playoffs. Rhett, this was great. I got to edit this earlier so it gets up earlier because the trade deadline's at 3 p.m. tomorrow. So everybody, tomorrow after 3, Derek Kramer will join us to either talk about the Pacers doing something or nothing. We'll see. Could be a shorter one if they do nothing or just dump Wiseman. And then we'll talk Pacers Clippers way later into Friday. So, Rhett, where can people find you and the things you have to say about the salary cap, the Pacers, and all these trades? My goodness, were there a lot.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Rhett _ on X at Rhett _ Bauer. I think on Blue Sky it's the same deal. My title today is the Sultan of Slop, which I think Tony and I were both very happy with, and that ties in perfectly with right now. Yes. So looking forward to the chaos that's happening. You said that the Pacers may not make any moves because they made the conference finals. Like, well, that's apparently not that big of a deal because Luka Doncic got traded after they made the finals. So, like, literally anything is on the table.
The Wolves traded Cat. The Mavericks traded Luka. Making the West Finals is apparently very bad for keeping your team together. The Celtics and the Pacers are like, we're good. We like our group.
We're going to dump Springer and dump Wiseman. We'll be good. 2 completely different levels of comfort with the roster there, I think. But so I'll be around. I'll be around for all that stuff and surely be putting some thoughts on there. But it's good stuff.
The Sultan of Slop. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll break it all down tomorrow.